Hi, this is Human Program, and today I want to tell you how to make custom effect scenes on the Elektron Digitakt. These performance effects, or they go by scatter or performance layer or scenes as they're called for the Octatrack, are possible on the Digitakt. They're cueable, sequenceable effects for turnarounds, build-ups, and even song transitions. The effects track on the new Elektron Syntakt encourages this playstyle, and while the setup's different, a lot of the same ideas are possible on the Digitakt and Digitone as well. And it's a really fun way to perform with these instruments. In this video, I'll look at how to do this in a few different steps. First, I'll show you how to make performance or zero trigs as a technique for using on any track for sample performance. Next, using those trigs with MIDI Loopback to the FX channel, we can make global effects presets like chorus or delay risers. Then, using a double loopback technique, you can get full-on effect scenes by locking parameters for effects and multiple tracks at the same time. And using that, what I think is the star of this show, is the up to 1 bar freeze delay buffer that can persist across pattern changes. And finally, I'll play out with a little sequencing trick that's a nice way to combine this with other performance techniques. So first, for performance or zero trigs, you turn off the sequencer by turning the trig probability to 0, and then parameter lock individual steps. I haven't seen a lot of people use the Digitakt this way, but it's really powerful with the Digitakt's sample mangling chops for improvisation. Electronaut user Jerry Dorsey pointed this out recently. So you can do different kinds of effects, using a bunch of different parameters, and just lock them and perform them as you like. Next, we'll talk about using a loopback on the effects channel of the Digitakt. Now, Syntakt has an effects sequencer track, but Digitakt and Digitone both have effects MIDI channels, which have a number of the same features. Through MIDI and through using loopback, you have control over the reverb and delay settings. On the Digitakt, there's the compressor and also input settings for external audio. Using the same performance trig technique I just talked about, on the global effects setting, using MIDI Loopback gives you control over up to 8 CC values per MIDI track, so 8 different controls, plus an LFO that can move one of these. Now, if you haven't used MIDI Loopback before, plugging the MIDI out into the MIDI in, be sure not to overlap MIDI channels at all. Don't cross the streams, as it were, because it will crash your machine if you overlap and send infinite instructions. So this technique already enables some quick access to precise settings: high feedback, filter delay, a dark reverb, pattern volume, fade in and out, and then you can pick some settings and lock some in and have fun thinking of uses for the LFO. Now, because the LFO can modulate the delay time, which is what you need for a real chorus effect, you can do that, but it takes an extra step that's worth explaining quickly. MIDI CC commands have a resolution of 127, and chorus needs a finer scale resolution to sound good, at about 0.1 to 0.2. So you have to use the NRPN numbers in the manual that I'd always ignored before, and that has a finer resolution but takes 4 CC slots If you haven't done it before, it's like this. The first two values tell it the address, and then the second two slots tell the coarse and fine values for the number. So if you do this for chorus, you still have room for other settings in values 5 to 8 to make different choruses on different trigs. I always like watching the LFO push the value up and down. But that reminds me that you need to make a trig to turn off the LFO, because the LFO won't turn off even if you mute the track. So you have to turn it off with a trig. Now, the effects channel gets you a lot of possibilities, but set up like this, you can't both snap effect settings and change track settings in a full-on scene like on the Octatrack. So for doing that, what we need is a double loopback, which I think of as kind of the final boss of MIDI loopback techniques on the Digitakt. I've set up track A here in the same way that I just described, where it's controlling channel 11 for the effects track, and I'm picking 6 values that it's going to control, and then MIDI track B is going to be sent to all of the audio tracks by setting them all to channel 8. Then MIDI track C is able to control MIDI tracks A and B also using MIDI, but that lets you pick up to 8 total values to change on a per track basis. Okay, so with this kind of setting, you could do things like a resonator, where you send everything to the delay and then turn the delay time down and the feedback up. Volume pump based on an LFO. I like the reverb blast, where you ramp the amp down after turning up the reverb and the delay a little bit. And I'll mention now, usually the way that I reset things is to turn the delay time to medium, and then turn the feedback on the delay down and filter the delay all the way down, which turns off that kind of empties out the delay buffer, which can give you some artifacts and weird noises if you don't take it out. And you also want to turn off the LFO using that reset trig. One thing that's great is it's a selective control all, because with the settings where you control the audio tracks, you can pick exactly which tracks have their values sent to it. You could take your kick drum out of the whole equation if you wanted, or just control your melodic or just your percussion tracks. Actually, with the 8 tracks, or with the 8 CC settings, you could use 4 total channels and control 2 groups of tracks using one kind of master MIDI channel there. But in terms of which values you pick to change with CC, you should know that while Control All makes relative changes to your values, CC makes absolute changes. So if you change your filter, for instance, every value is going to jump to 65 or 66 rather than just adding to what value it had before. So you can use it on values that you'd used, but you'll need to use like Funk No in order to get out of any effect that you use like that. What I like to do is use settings that I don't use otherwise on tracks or in my sound design. And since there are 3 different volume controls in the Digitakt, you've got the track level, sample level and the amp volume. I never use the sample level, so I can use that to make effects and not worry about messing anything else up. And then I'll usually put the delay send. And then there are two last tracks, if there's four delay settings from the effects channel that are kind of essential. And I'll usually put, say, delay volume and reverb decay, but I'm still trying out others. On both the Digitone and the Syntakt, you can also do things with the mod wheel, breath control, aftertouch, and pitch bend, which are really powerful. The final big step, and in my opinion this is really the killer feature, a freeze delay, which is a buffer that lasts up to 1 bar that you can make and then filter and mangle and run indefinitely, even across pattern changes. To set up for a 1 bar delay, what you do is you get a trig ready, and you want to turn the delay time to the max and your feedback to around 100. Now, you're translating between CC values and the values on the machine, so feedback of 100 is a CC value of 64. And for the delay times, you have to subtract 1 from the value on the CCs, but you can always check that on the filter page. Okay, so you've set your delay time and your feedback near 100, and then you want to turn the volume of your tracks off, and then have an LFO turn the volume on for the amount of time that it'll take to fill the delay buffer. Now, this depends on the LFO speed and mult, and I did more math than I'd care to admit before figuring out the easy way to remember. You just set the speed to 64, and then your mult is divisions of the bar. So a whole note, the mult is 1, half note 2, quarter note 4, eighth note 8, and it goes up to 32. For dotted notes, you just turn your LFO speed down to 48 and keep the number the same for the mult. So your trig holds some settings and can hold some delays, like some filter settings, but you use up your LFO making the freeze. I had a bit of a light bulb moment realizing that as long as you keep the delay time the same, you can use another trig with a different LFO and different settings as soon as the buffer starts to repeat, and you can mangle, add to your buffer, combine effects, tweak settings by hand, do sort of whatever you want to your buffer, and then that reset trig that I mentioned earlier, filtering out your delay, turning off the feedback, turning off the LFO, empties out your buffer, and you're all set. Because you can change the delay time, you've got some rough control over pitch up and down. You could also, if you're not using tuning in your sound design, you could also use that over CC for the track tuning settings as well. And then TD Music on Elektronauts thought of this last use case. You can fill the delay buffer, and as long as the delay time in the next pattern is the same, you can leave it looping while you stop the sequencer or change the song to a new pattern. This seems like a great thing to be able to do for transitioning between songs, between sections of songs, and so forth. So I hope you find this fun to use. I'll note in parting one last tip, that this makes for an interesting case for a kind of effects-based song mode. Because in addition to using the performance trigs, you could also sequence these effects normally. Now, if you're doing a different effect every 16th note, more power to you. But for a lot of genres, I think the effects track makes a natural fit with the 1/8 scale for the sequencer. Every row of your sequencer is 4 bars, so you can set different things at different points in a song section to be changing a bit, subtly or not, in the background while you do different other kinds of setting changes like Control Alt and Mute. This sequence is 32 bars, but using conditional trigs, you could go even longer. That'll do it for this video. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you next time.